The bell above the bakery door rang at 7:04 a.m., and Amara Whitfield didn't even look up. Steam curled off the espresso machine behind her, fogging the glass of the pastry case, and the whole shop smelled the way it always did at that hour. Yeast and burnt sugar and the particular warmth of an oven that had been running since 5. She already knew the sound of every regular's footsteps, the shuffle of Mr. Okafor's cane, the quick double tap of the twins from the daycare next door, the heavy, tired steps of the night shift nurses who came in craving something sweet before bed. This footstep was none of those. It was slow, measured, expensive. She lifted her eyes from the tray of croissants she was arranging and found 4 men filling the small doorway of Rosalind's bakery like they'd been poured into it. Black suits, pressed sharp enough to cut. Sunglasses indoors at 7 in the morning. And in front of them, a man who moved like the room already belonged to him. He was maybe 35, dark hair swept back, a face carved from patience and command. He didn't look around the shop the way customers usually did, scanning the pastry case, deciding between the almond twist and the cinnamon roll. He looked at her. "Amara Whitfield," he said. Not a question. Her hand stilled on the tray. "Can I help you?" "My name is Jin-ho Seo." He said it simply, like it should mean something, and from the way his men shifted their weight, she understood that in some rooms it did. "I own the building at the end of this block, and several others near it." She kept her voice even. "Good for you. You want a coffee or not?" Behind him, one of the suited men made a small sound that might have been a laugh, quickly swallowed. Jin-ho didn't smile, but something in his eyes sharpened with interest. He reached into his coat and set a small black box on the counter between them, flipping it open with one finger. Inside, a diamond ring caught the morning light streaming through the front window and threw it back in 100 directions. "I've heard a great deal about you, Miss Whitfield," he said. "That you fed the Chen family for 3 months after their restaurant burned and never told anyone. That you covered rent for the woman 2 doors down when her husband left. That you work 60 hours a week at this bakery and still find time to volunteer at the shelter on 5th. Amara's jaw tightened. "You've been checking up on me. I have people who look into things that interest me. And I interest you. Your kindness does." He nudged the box an inch closer to her. "I want to see something. This ring is worth more than you'll make in the next 10 years standing behind this counter. Take it. No conditions. No favors owed. Just take it and walk away from all of this today." Behind her, the ovens ticked as they cooled, and somewhere in the back a timer began to beep unanswered. Amara didn't move to silence it. Her whole attention had narrowed to the small, glittering thing sitting on the marble counter between them, and to the 4 men standing like statues behind their boss, watching her with the flat, professional patience of people who had seen this exact scene play out 100 times before, always ending the same way. "Why me?" she asked. "There are 1,000 people in this city who'd take that ring and thank God for it. Why walk in here, this early, with an audience, and hand it to a girl behind a pastry counter?" "Because 1,000 people taking it would tell me nothing I don't already know," Jin-ho said. "You refusing it would tell me something I've never learned in 35 years. The shop had gone very quiet. Even the espresso machine seemed to be holding its breath. Amara looked at the ring. Really looked at it, the way the diamond sat in its setting like a small captured star. The kind of thing that could pay off her mother's hospital bills 3 times over, could get her out of the apartment with the broken radiator, could change the shape of her whole life in one motion. Then she looked at him. "You didn't come here to give me a gift," she said quietly. "You came here to see what I'd do with it. That's not generosity, Mr. Seo. That's a test." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, a flicker like a man watching a door open where he'd expected a wall. "Then answer the test," he said. She closed the box gently and slid it back across the counter to him. "No, thank you. I've got croissants burning." She turned and walked into the back kitchen without another word, and left him standing there, the wealthiest, most dangerous man in the city, holding a diamond ring that a bakery clerk in a flour-dusted apron had just refused without a second glance. He didn't leave. Not really. Over the following 2 weeks, Jin-ho Seo became a fixture at Rosalind's, though never announced by phone calls or appointments, just the sudden hush that fell over the shop whenever his car pulled up outside. He never brought the ring again. He ordered black coffee, sat at the corner table, and watched. He watched Amara diffuse an argument between 2 elderly customers fighting over the last blueberry muffin by quietly baking a second batch before either of them noticed. He watched her slip a bag of day-old bread to a man sleeping in the bus shelter across the street, timing it so he wouldn't have to ask. He watched her count out exact change twice for a flustered teenager who was $3 short and wave off the difference like it was nothing. He watched her remember, without being told, that Mr. Okafor liked his coffee poured before he even reached the register, that the nurses on the 7 to 7 shift needed their orders boxed to go without asking, that the twins from the daycare got 2 extra napkins folded into little paper hats because it made them laugh. None of it was performed for him. That was what unsettled him most. In his world, kindness was currency, spent deliberately in front of witnesses, in exchange for loyalty or reputation. Amara's kindness happened in the gaps between customers, in moments she likely forgot the instant they ended, and it never once seemed to occur to her that anyone was keeping score. He'd built an empire on a single belief, one his father had taught him before he was old enough to understand what it would cost him. Everyone has a price. He'd tested that belief on judges and journalists, on rivals and lovers, and it had never once failed him. Amara Whitfield was the first crack in it. "You're wasting your time here," his second-in-command, Daniel, told him on the 9th day, watching from the car as Jin-ho once again crossed the street toward the bakery. "The woman clearly isn't interested in what you're offering." "I'm not offering anymore," Jin-ho said. "I'm learning." The trouble at Rosalind's started on a Tuesday, the kind of trouble that announced itself with a manila envelope taped to the front door before opening hours. Amara found it first. She unfolded the letter with hands that had gone very still, and read it twice to make sure she wasn't imagining the words. Notice of Lee's termination. 60 days. Rosalind Cho, the bakery's owner and the closest thing to family Amara had outside her own mother, was 71 years old and had run the shop for 30 years. She came in an hour later to find Amara standing behind the counter with the letter still in her hand. "They're selling the building," Rosalind said before Amara could even ask. Her voice was flat with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been fighting this fight quietly for weeks and finally lost. New landlord bought out the block. Some development company. They want it emptied for renovation. Boutique condos, probably. "I got the same letter as everyone else on this street. You can fight this. There are laws." "I already tried, baby." "I don't have the money for a lawyer who can go up against a company with that kind of paper behind it. 60 days. That's what we've got." Amara didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her mother's old laptop, searching tenant protection statutes until the words blurred, jotting notes on the back of a grocery receipt. The apartment was small and thin-walled, the radiator clanking every few minutes like something trying to speak, and every so often she'd catch herself staring at the same paragraph of legal text for 5 minutes without reading a single word of it. Her mother, propped up in the next room on oxygen and a stack of pillows, called out weakly for water around midnight, and Amara brought it to her, and sat by the bed a long moment, smoothing the blanket, thinking about all the ways a person could lose everything in 60 days. "You look like you're carrying the sky again," her mother said, voice thin but steady. She'd said that phrase since Amara was a teenager, the closest thing to a warning she ever gave. "Whatever it is, baby, you don't have to carry it alone." "I know, Mama." Amara kissed her forehead. "I'm just figuring out how heavy it is first." She thought about the diamond ring, about how easy it would be to call the number on the business card Jin-ho had left, tucked under her tip jar without a word, and ask him to make this problem disappear the way men like him made problems disappear. She didn't call. Instead, the next morning, she went to the shop early and started making a list. Every regular who came through that door, every name and number she could gather, every small kindness she'd banked over years that she'd never once thought of as leverage until now. Jin-ho noticed the letter on the counter before Amara said a word about it. He read it while she pretended to restock the napkin dispenser, her back to him, her shoulders drawn tight. "I could make one phone call," he said, "and this problem ends today." "I know you could." She didn't turn around. "That's exactly why I'm not asking you to." He set his coffee down, and for once he seemed at a genuine loss. "You'd rather lose the shop than accept help from me?" "I'd rather win it myself." She finally faced him. "You want to see who I really am? This is it. Not the ring. This." He studied her for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "Something you probably haven't seen work in a while," she said. "I'm going to ask people for help and trust that they'll say yes." Word moved through the neighborhood the way it always had before Amara had a reason to test it. Quietly, person to person, favor answering favor. She organized a tenants meeting in the back room of the bakery, using folding chairs borrowed from the church 2 blocks down. Rosalind cried when 11 business owners showed up, all of them holding the same letter. The dry cleaner who'd pressed Amara's mother's church dress for free the year money was tightest. The barbershop owner who'd let neighborhood kids sit and do homework after school. The flower stand woman who always saved the bruised stems for anyone who couldn't pay full price. Amara realized, watching them file into the cramped back room with their folding chairs and their worry, that she wasn't building something new. She was simply calling in a decade of small, unspoken debts that no one had ever kept written down. She stood at the front of the room with a legal pad and a borrowed marker, and for the first time in her life, spoke to a room full of adults twice her age like she expected them to listen. To her surprise, they did. Amara had done her research. Under the city's commercial tenant protection ordinance, recently strengthened after a wave of similar displacements 2 years earlier, property owners were required to offer a formal right of first refusal period to any tenant group that could demonstrate sustained community investment and file within a specific window. It was a narrow path. It required paperwork, signatures, verified testimonials, a formal petition lodged with the city zoning office before day 30. It also required money for filing fees and a lawyer to make sure it was airtight, money none of them had. This was where Jin-ho finally found the shape of the help he could actually give, the kind that didn't rob her of the fight. "I know a housing attorney," he told Amara the next morning, sliding a card across the counter. "No diamond this time, just a name and a phone number. She's good. She owes me nothing and I'm not paying her for this. I'm simply telling her the case exists. What she does with that information is up to her, and what you do with her help is entirely up to you." Amara looked at the card for a long moment. Then she picked it up. "That's the kind of help I can accept," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Desai, took the case not as a favor to Jin-ho Seo, whose name she recognized and clearly regarded with wary respect, but because, as she told Amara over the phone, "You already did the hard part. You built the coalition. I just have to file the paperwork correctly." For 3 weeks, Amara ran herself ragged. She went door to door after her bakery shifts, collecting signatures and notarized statements, her feet aching inside shoes that had long since given up their cushioning. She learned the names of shopkeepers she'd only ever nodded at before, learned which ones needed convincing and which ones needed only to be asked. She stood in front of the zoning board with her voice shaking and her chin up, describing 30 years of a neighborhood built on a woman's flour-dusted hands, watching the board members' faces shift from bureaucratic boredom to something closer to attention. She lost sleep, lost weight, and twice broke down crying in the walk-in freezer where no customer could see her, pressing her forehead against the cold metal shelving until the shaking passed and she could go back out front and smile like nothing was wrong. Some nights she came home so tired she fell asleep still in her apron, only to wake at 5 and do it all again. She kept a folder of signatures in her backpack everywhere she went, guarding it the way other people guarded something precious. Because in a real sense, it was 30 years of a community's memory, distilled into a stack of paper that might, if she did everything exactly right, be enough to save it. Jin-ho watched all of it from the sidelines, present, but careful never to step onto the field. He answered 2 questions Priya asked about municipal procedure, connected her with a records clerk he genuinely knew from a legitimate business dealing years ago, and otherwise did nothing but sit at his corner table and watch a woman fight harder for a stranger's bakery than most people fought for their own lives. The night before the zoning board's final ruling, he found her locking up alone, the street empty, the neighborhood dark except for the bakery's dying porch light. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know something. I have never, in my life, watched anyone work the way you have these past 3 weeks. Not for money, not for anything that benefits you directly." "It benefits me," Amara said. "Rosalind's the only person who gave me a job when I had a newborn cousin to help raise and a mother who couldn't work anymore. This shop kept my family fed for 6 years. I don't forget things like that." "Everyone has a price," Jin-ho said, almost to himself, like a man testing a belief he could feel cracking beneath his own weight. "That's what I was raised to believe. That's what's kept me alive in a business built on betrayal. But I can't find yours." Amara turned the key in the lock and looked at him. Really looked, the way she had that first morning. Except this time there was no ring on the counter, no test in his eyes. Just a tired man standing in the dark, asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "Maybe," she said quietly, "you've just never met someone who wasn't for sale." She walked home alone that night, and he watched her go, and for the first time since his father had taught him the only rule he'd ever lived by, Jin-ho Seo did not know what he believed anymore. Part 2. The zoning board ruling came down on a gray Thursday morning, and Amara read the notice 3 times before she let herself believe it. The tenant coalition's petition had been approved. Rosalind's bakery, along with 10 other small businesses on the block, had won a legally binding right of first refusal, giving them 90 days to organize a buyout offer before the developer could proceed. It wasn't a finish line. It was a chance. But after 60 sleepless nights, a chance felt like everything. Rosalind hugged her so hard Amara's ribs ached, and the whole shop erupted into something between a celebration and a group cry, flour and tears, and someone's grandmother pulling out a bottle of cheap champagne she'd apparently been saving for exactly this kind of miracle. Jin-ho wasn't there for the celebration. He arrived an hour later, once the crowd had thinned, and found Amara sitting alone at the corner table. His table, she realized with a small, tired smile, staring at the ruling like she still didn't trust it to be real. You did it, he said. We did it. 11 business owners, a lawyer who believed in a coalition instead of a paycheck, and about 400 signatures. I just organized the room. You built the room. He sat across from her, uninvited but not unwelcome. There's still the buyout. 90 days to raise enough capital to actually purchase the block from the developer, or the right of first refusal expires and they proceed anyway. Amara's smile faded slightly. I know, we're already fundraising. It won't be enough. Not from us. But it's ours to try, and I'd rather fail trying than win because you wrote a check nobody asked you to write. Jin-ho was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, and for one heartbeat Amara's stomach dropped, certain she'd see the black velvet box again. Instead, he set down a folded piece of paper. A pledge, modest, deliberately modest, she noted immediately, far less than what he could have offered, made not to her, not to the bakery, but to the coalition's general fund, structured exactly like every other donor's contribution, with his name listed as simply J. Seo, local business owner. 1 share, he said. The same weight as anyone else's. I'm not buying your building, Amara. I'm buying a coffee subscription, same as everyone in this room, except mine comes with slightly better tax paperwork. For the first time since he'd walked through that door with a diamond ring, Amara laughed, really laughed, the sound surprising even her. That, she said, is the least Mafia boss thing I've ever seen you do. I'm told I contain multitudes. The next 10 weeks were the hardest of Amara's life, and also, unexpectedly, some of the fullest. The coalition raised funds in 100 small ways, bake sales that turned the whole block into something like a street festival, community dinners where Rosalind's kitchen fed 50 people off donated ingredients, a viral social media post that brought in strangers from 3 states over who'd simply liked the story of a neighborhood refusing to disappear, quietly. Children from the daycare drew posters for the shop windows. The barbershop owner cut hair for free in exchange for donations. Even the bus shelter regular Amara had quietly fed for months showed up one Saturday with $11 in loose change, insisting it go toward the fund, and Amara had to excuse herself to the freezer again, this time for entirely different reasons. Amara herself picked up double shifts, donating half her tips to the fund, running herself thin in a way her mother scolded her for every single night. She stopped counting the hours. She started measuring time instead in donation totals, in names added to the growing wall of supporters taped up behind the register, in the small, stubborn hope that kept refusing to die even as the number they needed stayed frustratingly out of reach. Jin-ho remained a fixture, but a changed one. He stopped watching from a careful distance and started showing up with sleeves rolled, hauling folding tables at the fundraisers, arguing cheerfully with Rosalind about the correct ratio of cinnamon in her signature rolls, letting his own men, increasingly bewildered by their boss's new hobby, carry boxes instead of watch the perimeter. Something in him was loosening visibly week by week. Daniel noticed it first and said nothing, though his eyebrows said plenty. The men who worked for Jin-ho had spent years learning to read the smallest shifts in his mood, the tightness in his jaw before a difficult decision, the particular stillness that preceded violence. None of them had ever seen this version of him, a man showing up early to carry sacks of flour, staying late to fold folding chairs, laughing at something a bakery clerk had said under her breath. One evening, Daniel found him alone in the back office, going over the ledgers of a legitimate side venture with unusual care, and asked, half-joking, whether the boss planned on retiring to bake bread full-time. Not bread, Jin-ho said without looking up. Just figuring out what an honest ledger looks like. Turns out I never learned. Daniel didn't have a response for that. He simply nodded, and went back to work, and privately wondered what exactly had walked into that bakery 3 months earlier and rearranged something fundamental in a man he'd known for a decade. He didn't tell Amara most of what changed in him during those weeks, not directly. But she saw it in small things. The way he began paying his own men fairly and openly instead of through the layered secrecy his father had insisted on. The way he quietly stepped back from a deal that would have displaced another block of family businesses 2 neighborhoods over, a deal he would have closed without a second thought 3 months earlier. The way, one evening, he told her about his father's rule. Everyone has a price, and admitted, for the first time out loud, that he'd spent 15 years testing that rule on people who mattered to him, and had never once stopped to ask what it had cost him to prove himself right over and over, in a life increasingly empty of anyone he actually trusted. I built an empire on that belief, he said, and I don't think I've had a single relationship in 15 years that wasn't, in some way, a transaction. And now? Now I keep a table at a bakery I don't own, run by a woman who wouldn't take my money, doing the one thing that has never once felt like a transaction in my entire adult life. Amara didn't answer that. She didn't need to. She simply refilled his coffee, the way she had 100 times before, and let the moment sit between them, unspoken and true. On the 88th day, 3 of the coalition's largest anticipated donors pulled out at once. A scare tactic, Priya later confirmed, orchestrated by the development company through a set of shell entities designed to look like independent withdrawals. The emails arrived within an hour of each other, each one polite, each one final, each one citing some vague change in investment priorities that fooled no one who read them side by side. It left the fund short by nearly 40%, with 2 days remaining before the right of first refusal window closed for good. Priya called Amara that evening, her usually steady voice tight with barely contained anger. This isn't a coincidence. Someone made calls. I can't prove it in a way that would hold up, not in 48 hours, but I know pressure tactics when I see them stacked up like this. Amara sat with the phone against her ear, staring at the fundraiser total on her laptop screen, watching the number that represented 30 years of a woman's life suddenly feel impossibly far away again. The coalition met in the back room of the bakery that night, the mood as low as Amara had ever seen it. Rosalind sat with her hands folded, quiet in a way that scared Amara more than any amount of shouting would have. "We're not going to make it," Rosalind said softly. 30 years, and we're going to lose it over a Thursday deadline. Amara stood, and every face in the room turned toward her, the way they had learned to over the past 3 months. She thought of the diamond ring sitting untouched in its box, back when the easiest answer would have been to simply take it and let a rich man's guilt solve everything. She thought of what she'd told Jin-ho that first morning. "I'd rather win it myself." "There's still a path," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "We reopen the fundraiser publicly tonight, tell people exactly what happened, that someone tried to sabotage a neighborhood trying to save itself. People respond to that. We ask for 48 hours of pure community will, and we ask loud." It wasn't guaranteed, it wasn't even likely, but it was hers, her plan, her decision, made without looking to the man in the corner who could have solved it all with a single phone call and never once did. Jin-ho watched her rally 11 exhausted business owners back into motion at 9 o'clock at night, watched her personally call every journalist and community organizer she'd ever met, watched her post a message online that was raw and unpolished and true in a way that no marketing campaign could have manufactured, and he understood, with a clarity that settled into his chest like something solid finally locking into place, that he had spent his entire life mistaking control for strength, when the strongest thing he'd ever witnessed was a woman refusing to let anyone, including him, carry a fight that was rightfully hers. The 48 hours that followed became, briefly, a small local phenomenon. The story of the sabotaged fundraiser spread exactly the way Amara had hoped, carried by neighbors and strangers, and eventually, a local news segment that ran the night before the deadline. Donations poured in, not enough from any single source to raise suspicion, but enough, together, small and human and real, to close the gap with 6 hours to spare. Rosalind's bakery, and 10 other small businesses along that block, secured their buyout on the 90th day. Jin-ho found Amara alone in the bakery 2 nights later, after the celebrations had quieted and the shop had returned, briefly, to something like normal. She was closing up, same as that very first morning, flowers still faintly dusting her apron, tired in the particular way of someone who has just finished carrying something enormous and finally set it down. He didn't bring a ring this time. He brought nothing but himself, and stood in the doorway the way he had 3 months earlier, except this time there were no suited men behind him, no sunglasses, no test dressed up as generosity. "I came here the first time," he said, "to see what you'd do with a diamond. I thought I already knew the answer to every question worth asking about a person. That money reveals character, that everyone eventually shows their price. You didn't just refuse the ring, Amara. You spent 3 months proving that some things were never for sale in the first place, and you did it without needing me to make it easy." Amara set down her keys and faced him. "And now?" He reached into his coat, and this time, when the small black box appeared, Amara felt something different settle over the room. Not tension, not a test, but something quieter and far more fragile. He opened it. The same ring. The one she'd refused on the very first morning. "I'm not offering this to see what you'll do," he said, his voice steadier than she'd ever heard it, and somehow, underneath that steadiness, unmistakably afraid. "I have no test left to give you. I have watched you fight for a stranger's bakery harder than I've ever fought for anything I claim to want. I have nothing left to prove to myself about who you are. I'm only asking, as a man with no leverage left and nothing to offer but himself, would you choose this? Would you choose me? Not because of what I have. Because of who I've become, watching you." The bakery was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerated case, and, somewhere outside, the distant sound of the city settling into night. The chandelier light from 3 months ago, the suits, the sunglasses, the audience of quiet men, all of it was gone now, stripped away until there was nothing left in the room but two people in a small black box that no longer had any power to buy or prove anything at all. Amara thought of the version of herself that had stood behind this counter on that first morning, certain she already knew every kind of man who walked through that door with money in his hand and an agenda behind his eyes. She thought of how wrong and how right she'd turned out to be. Amara looked at the ring and then at him, and understood, the way she hadn't fully understood it that first morning, that the question in front of her now was not the question he'd asked 3 months ago. That test had been about her price. This one was about her choice. "The first time you offered me this," she said quietly, "I said no because you were trying to buy an answer out of me. You wanted to know if I could be bought, and the honest truth is, I wasn't just protecting my pride when I refused. I was protecting myself from becoming someone's proof of a theory." She stepped closer. "But you're not testing a theory anymore, are you?" "No," he said. "I gave that theory up somewhere around the 40th folding chair I carried into this shop." Amara reached out, not for the ring, but for his hand closing the box gently between both their palms, the same way she had that very first morning, except this time she didn't push it back across the counter. "Then yes," she said, "I'm choosing you. Not the ring. Not what you have. You, the version of you that showed up to argue about cinnamon ratios and carried boxes nobody asked you to carry and finally stopped needing to buy. The proof that people are good." Her voice caught just slightly. "That's my answer. It was never about the diamond. It was always going to be about whether you could become someone worth choosing freely. You did." For the first time in 15 years, the first time, perhaps, in his entire adult life, Jin-ho Seo had absolutely nothing to say. He stood in the doorway of a small bakery, holding a box that had once been a test and was now simply a promise, and found that every carefully constructed word he'd ever used to control a room, close a deal, or win an argument had entirely deserted him. He simply reached for her hand and held it, speechless, while outside the window the city carried on, utterly unaware that somewhere in it, a rule 15 years in the making had finally, quietly, broken. Behind the counter, the ovens ticked as they cooled for the night, the same small, ordinary sound that had been playing the morning this whole story began, except now, for the first time, neither of them was listening for anything but each other.